Okay. So today we just have staff that work in or support elementary GROW programs. And when we just call them GROW programs, just to let you know, just to make it easier for everybody, we realize that across the county, programs are, a lot of them are ED programs are called therapeutic learning programs. Some are called the STEPS programs. Some are called TLCs. Rosy and I, just for the ease, are just going to call them all GROW programs, even though we know that you guys we'll call them something else, but we have the GROW model or the GROW program in there. So today we have the staff from elementary programs. We don't have things necessarily prepared for you. We do have content that we can go into deeper and review anything that needs to be reviewed for anybody. The intent of today was really just to get some staff from the different elementary programs across the county together in one space to kind of digest the material that we've gone over so far in the GROW Summit, and also to ask questions, to collaborate, to start planning for next year. So we wanted to give you a forum to do that. So this is that forum. So glad you guys can make it here with us today. And we had scheduled an hour and a half. So if we can go till 3, I can stay a little bit longer if need be, or of course, if we have everything figured out by 3, then we can end at that time too. All right. So I just put this slide up here just to remind us about the different GROW program components so that we can be referencing that during the discussion today. Rosy, do you want to say anything to launch things off?
No, I just want to, I know that we've said this before, but we just want to thank everybody for having such a heart for the kids that we serve. And we know that it's always a little bit unsettling for us as grownups, for anyone, when there's like changes. And I think this is why Alison and I have from the get-go said to you guys, on site, to your special ed directors, to anyone that we're speaking to, that GROW is going to look very differently from our pre-launch year 2 years ago to our GROW.1 last year, and what we end up having 5 years from now, or 4 years from now, actually. So, and the reason for that is that we're part of the task that we're given as professionals is to constantly be consuming progress in our fields, right? This is why we all take continuing education courses, where we're required, like I have to keep my BCBA certificate, I have to have X number, like 32, I forget, 32, 36 continuing education units every 2 years and recertify. Alison, the same thing for being a mental health therapist. And the reason that our governing boards require that is because science is always growing. So what was an evidence-based practice 15 years ago is not now, and is not, well, let me take that back, is an evidence-based practice, but it's not best practice. And I think this is why sometimes it feels like, oh crap, here they go again. It's not because Alison and I have this like love of throwing you guys curveballs. It's really, if there was a one size fits all, every single program across the country, not the county, the country would have its hands on this, because our students are our most fragile. They are our most challenging. They are the ones that actually cost us the most. And so whether we want to talk about social justice, this is why Alison and I do what we do for a living. See, you shouldn't have told me, do I want to say anything? Because now I'm going to go on. This is why Alison and I do. And I would probably guess that everybody here today, this is why we do what we do, right? We could work with the sweet little easy kids in the mod to severe class, or go be in corporate Starbucks land and make way more money. But this is our contribution to the thread of humanity. But the reality is our kids are the most expensive. And so remember, it's $150,000 a year for a non-public school.
At least.
And being in our programs costs a lot of money. So districts, counties, states are driven to find a solution. And so this is why if it feels like every year there's layers that we add in, it's purposeful. And it's because we're all learning, and that's why we call these our learning communities, is that none of us have the exact answer or the perfect constant fidelity of implementation. And so the key is we need to be leaning on evidence-based practices that are best practice. So for example, all of us remember when it was an evidence-based practice to use antibiotics, and it was best practice that anytime you went to the doctor, a sniffle, a cough, whatever, they'd, give those out like lollipops. Well, 20 years later, we realized we really screwed the pooch on doing that, right? And now we have like super germs that probably would have never evolved if we hadn't done that. Antibiotics are still an evidence-based practice. It's not a best practice to give it willy-nilly, right? And so people who aren't used to that still get frustrated. I remember even like 10 years ago, my mother would get frustrated. She's like, you need to go to the doctor and get antibiotics. I'm like, Mom, they don't give antibiotics for colds anymore. And like, it was super hard for her to like outgrow that, but it wasn't a best practice. So I'm kind of over spending too much time on this because we, from the bottom of our hearts, thank you for your patience. And we want you to know, we understand how hard it is to actually embody this and practice it day in and day out. It's much easier to come in, pop in for an hour or two than it is to be there living it every day from bell to bell. So thank you. We applaud you. Man, if I win the lottery, if I win the gazillion dollar, it's everybody in our GROW programs. You're all getting a free vacay to wherever you want, because like we should automatically all get paid 25% extra for supporting our students. But that's when I can't be president. I wasn't born here. So anyway, that's enough. Sorry, Alison, I'll mute.
No, thank you, Rosy. All right. So anybody want to start this conversation? Anywhere you want to start the conversation, we are open. So if you guys, again, have questions, you want to just talk about certain components and what that's going to look like in your programs, we really want to give you this forum to do that and to collaborate, because you guys, there's no silly questions, because I bet you if you're thinking about it, there are definitely other people thinking about it too. So you can all learn from each other, okay? And as Rosy's talked about, this is a learning community. So we're all learning from each other. It doesn't mean that Rosy and I are always going to have the answer, but hopefully somebody else in here will chime in and we're all going to work through this together, okay? So feel free. Rosy, people really like the free vacation idea. Sounds awesome.
I think I would like a little more information on what that wellness time would look like.
Yeah, sure. So, so we're talking about wellness time, which is because since we're no longer doing honors time in terms of it being contingent, right, on their points system. Mm-hmm. So wellness time kind of fits in with the GROW family in that it's downtime we know that downtime can be a recipe for disaster. So I don't mean downtime. I mean, there being no academics. So no demands academically being placed on the students during that time. It's really a time for the students and the teachers and the staff to be able to connect, playing board games, doing interactive team building activities, those kind of things. And in that time, of course, you're practicing social emotional skills, you're coaching, and working on social skills as well. So it's time that was like honors, however, it's not earned. And I would say, Rosy, feel free to jump in, but I would say the more we can steer away from things like the electronics, right? Because that's time where they're just zoned out and they're not interacting. We want this to be a time where it's like a family game night, really, where you're all bonding and experiencing frustrating emotions too that come up during that time and working through them together.
Lauren, thank you for launching us with that, because I think that there's a lot of questions about that, what that's going to look like. And here are, Alison, have we shared out the reference and resource Padlet out to everybody yet?
No, not through this group. Let me go ahead and do that.
So we have a Padlet, which, if you have insomnia and you can't sleep, this will be a cure-all. But because Alison and I are total nerds and we literally this is what we do for our spare time, free time, ooh, let me just get one more article. So this Padlet has all the research, not just the concrete books by Dr. Bruce Perry or Dr. Ross Green or Dr. Becky Bailey or the manuals, the whole brain child, but actually the original research. Because remember, part of being a real active consumer of research is you do your homework. You don't just take someone's pretty book and it comes from Harvard, UCLA, and you think, oh, this is the Bible. You have to go back and actually look, is there actual, peer-reviewed research involved in this? Because anybody can put together a beautiful book with images and be a very strong presenter and sell their shtick. So you're going to see.
I have it up, Rosy. So you guys can see it. That.
Perfect.
And I sent the link. I put the link in the chat box too, but here's all the different.
Each area has a ton of original peer-reviewed research, and original peer-reviewed research is stuff that's coming out of universities, not companies that are doing their own internal research. Like, for example, Dr. Becky Bailey has a lot of research, but internal, right? That doesn't count. She also has research that's been done by a ton of people at other universities. The same thing with Dr. Green. Because then that's when you can really say, okay, this is an evidence-based practice, when it's not just me finding my own results that I want. But one of the things that Alison and I this year started really, not only from our experience with you guys in the programs, and most programs sharing that minimally once a month, there was an issue with honors where kids would end up flipping out because they couldn't access honors, even though we had them calibrated at the percentage that they were really needing. So some of the literature that is in this Padlet that we stumbled on is the whole research on shame and loss and belonging. So there's areas of research that are really outside of our wheelhouse. They're outside of applied behavior analysis. They're outside of clinical psychology in the sense of mental health therapy or cognitive behavioral therapy. So Alison and I, again, when we were given this task by the county, by SELPA, you can't just stick to what you're familiar with. You have to go into all these other fields, medical fields, social psychology, child development, industrial organizational research. Now that's where you can make money, I just realized. Do you realize how much those guys make? They make bank, and all they're doing is telling CEOs how to help their employees getting along. I'm like, what the heck? So some of the research that we stumbled on really talked about how for kids, especially our students, whether they had a capital T trauma or they're just the kid that's constantly under stress because they have a hard time learning and school's challenging and they have neurological organic challenges that make learning hard, is that and from our standpoint, we're just being good, strong team members. We're delivering reinforcement contingently with having them have access to honors. But for the kid, that lack of earning that is it turns into a whole other, I don't belong here. And I wasn't really familiar with the whole belonging and shaming research. Those of you who are familiar with Brene Brown, she's a huge shame researcher. She's looking at shame in adult constructs versus child constructs. So there's a number of articles in there that are really fascinating, and it made us really rethink. Again, it's not saying that we don't have things that our kids are earning contingently, right? But something that's as sacred as honors was really creating difficulties for quite a number of our programs. So the wellness time is really that time. It does not have to be an hour. It can be 20 minutes. It could be whatever you need to tailor for your group. And our recommendation is work with your team, work with your mental health therapist, your BCBA, and Alison and I to get something that fits your culture. So Shalani, you kind of already were doing elements of this anyway with your kids. It doesn't have to be now. It doesn't have to be half an hour. It could be 20 minutes at the end of your day together where you come together and you're playing a game or you're just sharing snacks together non-contingently. Because what we want to do is we want to start the day and we want to end the day in a strong, connected manner so that when they come back the next day, they're not revving up and doing the whole self-sabotage or just, we want to begin and end with as much focused on wellness. So when Stuckey de la Cruz shared about her soft start, she did this as well for her families. Her food Fridays weren't things that kids were earning. Her food Fridays or anything like that And really, any of their outings, unless the student was really physically acting out that day, it wasn't something that students were earning. It was just a given, right? And if they were and they would do it in smaller groups, and they would invite Alison and I, or Louisa Wood, the other BCBA, to accompany to make sure they had the right adult to student ratio. So it's as much as it can be about hanging out, playing Pictionary. Like one of the teams that I worked with, the kids would, because they all spend so much time, inordinate time on technology, they would share videos, and they were taught, okay, it can't have any language, it can't have any, inappropriate words, they were given like constructs and parameters of like funny videos. Another group was doing America's Funniest Home Videos. Like every Monday, Wednesday, Friday would be AFV for like 15 minutes. And then they would just hang out and, just do what they needed to do. And then Tuesdays, Thursdays, the kids would like share favorite like memes or videos that they liked. So I think we can put together like a Google Doc of wellness activities. But the whole idea is you're starting your day and you're ending your day connected as a family.
Yeah. Thanks, Rosy. I think that helped a lot. And I really want to just highlight one thing that you said that I think is so important, is that we're going to be writing out a manual, right? So we have a manual for last year, and then with the changes and the additions for this year, Rosy and I are going to be writing that out in a manualized form to be able to give you guys in the fall so that you can read more about this. But a key thing that Rosy was saying is basically we're not going to give you exactly what it looks like in every single program, right? So we're going to give you the framework for what wellness time is and the intention of it. And then it's up to you guys to make it your own, because we don't want to give you a prescription that doesn't make sense for you and for your body of students, for your staff. It's really for you guys to make it your own, in, like Rosy said, in consultation with your team. And of course with us, if we can be of help to you, we are more than happy to do that and to brainstorm with you. And then the purpose of these type of forum discussions, and a Google Doc is a great idea. We can put that together and hopefully next year have more regular times where we can get the elementary programs all together so that you guys can say like, hey, I'm hitting a stumbling block with my wellness time right now. Like, what are you guys doing? How often are you doing it? Are you going on outings as a part of your wellness time? What does that look like for you? How do you deal with behaviors during that time? So you guys can all learn from each other. And we can all problem solve and work together on this. Yes, Daniel, you're welcome for the manual. We will definitely have that out by the fall, and that'll give you guys, but we also understand that a lot of people don't read them. We plan on writing this all out, and we're going to have it in a manualized form, and we know that people usually don't read them. So that's another reason to have these type of discussion forums so that we can all talk and collaborate together and get any questions answered, that type of thing. So Lauren, does that answer your question about wellness time? Yeah.
It does. I know for me personally, I love manuals, even though we know reading is not my favorite. I was actually just typing a comment. I just spent over $100 on Amazon on the books I asked you about, as well as the behavior code and supplemental resources. And so I'm going through with my highlighter, and
Nice.
It's probably the first time I've ever actually sat down with a book and like highlighted stuff. So yeah, so it sounds like there is some flexibility as far as how long it's going to be.
Yes.
And then I'm almost envisioning it something like a teacher could almost in the middle of the day be like, hey guys, we need to regroup. It's time for wellness.
Yes.
Like
and
time.
you don't even have to, yes, exactly. And you don't have to call it wellness time either. If you call it, like Sticky calls it in the morning, a soft start. If you want to call it soft start in the morning and something else in the afternoon, or she calls it, she has community roundup too, she calls it, where they all get together and it's kind of like a self-governance meeting. Feel free to make it your own. Like if calling it wellness time sounds too formal or just too hippie-ish or too silly, and you think the kids are going to think that's silly, then call it something else. But yes, it can be 1 time a day, 2 times a day on the fly. It can be an outing on a Friday, but the idea is that we're building it into every day, and making sure that we are providing those opportunities for connection.
Lisa Campbell used to build in at the middle school social emotional time, and it sounds quite a bit like this because it was board game based or social emotional game based, and the kids didn't really realize they were working and talking.
Right.
And it worked on a lot of skills with the turn taking and positive language, as opposed to like, that's a stupid answer, or,
Right.
something like that. And it was interesting how she built that in with it being such a growth opportunity without the kids even realizing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, that does answer it.
Cool. Thanks.
Hey, Alison. So is that something that should be done as a group? Let's say you have a couple of kids who's willing to do it and others not really feeling it at that point in time. Can you sort of separate it, do it with the other kids at a different time of the day?
You're thinking if some kids didn't, is that you, Mr. Hunt? I can't see you, but if some of them didn't want to participate in that wellness time, you're saying,
Yes.
then to kind of split them up into smaller groups.
Yes.
Yes. So that could be an option. I mean, of course we're not going to force a student into engaging in the wellness time, but ideally the more that we're really focusing on this grow family and that everyone belongs and they're not having to earn it, it's not it's not contingent upon anything. Ideally, the students are going to want to participate, that these are activities they're going to want to do. So if we kept running into that issue, then we would just problem solve and talk about that as a team. But I would say, yeah, if you needed to separate and break down into smaller groups, that could be an option while we kind of work through what the barriers are to having them all together.
But the idea is to get them to do it together and sort of create camaraderie between the.
Exactly.
Okay.
Because here's what the bottom line, all programs for, well, school in general, but especially programs for ED students, it really is a pseudo family, whether we want to call it or not. So we are all, no matter what our histories are looking for like the structure of the family, belonging, acceptance, and kids are either going to find it the right way or they're going to find it the wrong way. This is all the research in social psychology, and if you go, the most fascinating psychology we've been reading or research we've been reading is in corrections. I've thought of you about a lot, Lauren. So in one of the folders on the research and resources, we actually have the DOJ document where about 10 years ago, they started pushing motivational interviewing and wellness practices into probation and parole. And because recidivism is so high, right? So they're saying the same thing that we're seeing. This is why it's called the school to prison pipeline, which is horrific, that's the reality, right? And it's for a specific, community subset of our community, which makes it even worse, right? This is why if Alison and I seem super kind of almost preachy about this, is because this is the one opportunity that our kids in our ED programs have. They will leave high school and they will never have access to anything free or anything to try to there's no evening the field here. We're just trying to give them a little bit of support and encouragement and instruction building so that hopefully we can mitigate other factors in their lives, right? So where was I going with this? I always get really kind of salty about the fact that we need to do this. Where was I going with this, Alison?
Well, we should have them do the self-wellness time together.
Yes. So yeah, exactly. So the research from the 90s and early 2000s, thank you, Mr. Hunt, on gang culture has really was really focused on, Lauren just looked, she fell off the beach. That was hilarious. So on the biggest tying factor to why humans across cultures, across countries, tackle into gangs is that feeling, that need, that literal neurobiological need to belong in a family system, right? At the most survival level, it's protection. But then it comes to all those other areas of, the Maslow's hierarchy that we shared with you guys in the previous trainings. So we need to be, I know we're supposed to teach them reading, writing, and math and all those other things, which hopefully we'll be able to get them to a place where they can absorb more of those skills. But those skills are not going to be obtainable unless we do create a pseudo family system. And so we've had teams that really had the family system going really well for about 2 months, and then they get a new student. And then there's like, you know, a bunch of unsettling, and then we have to work through that, right? But that's what happens in family systems altogether. It's just most of our kids in our programs have not had a lot of modeling in adaptive ways of navigating through the hardships, because not a single one of us comes from a perfect family. It's how are you trying to, as healthy as possible, navigate through those bumps? So yes.
Lauren, those statistics are horrifying. I just read that. Lauren
Yeah.
just put in some statistics from 2006, 2007.
So I'm spending my time reading. Yeah, it is. And I know I've shared my experience with the both of you, having worked at a state prison here and going through the medical records of the inmates. And I worked with a large variety in minimum and medium security and all sorts of disabilities and mental health issues. Like, it's almost like a checklist of how to end up in prison after going back into their histories. That this was all before I learned about emotional disturbances and trauma-informed care and education, that I just totally blew my mind. And recidivism's a hard word for me to say. The rates are just incredibly high. And yeah, when I read the statistics in the book, I was just like, you know, even though they're from 15-ish years ago, I'm sure they haven't exponentially changed for the better, because this is, you know, it's 15 years later, we're still talking about this. It's still a present issue in our system.
Right. Yeah.
But 56% of students with an emotional or behavioral disorder ended up in prison was just like, or had been arrested, was just, I mean, mind-boggling.
Right. Yeah. But absolutely.
It actually makes me want to burst into tears.
Yeah.
This is why yes, reading, writing, math, all that stuff is super important. But if we can't fundamentally help a child build some more adaptive ways of navigating their entire existence, I know that's like an overwhelming like thought. Knowing how to read and write is kind of irrelevant if you end up in prison.
And I think that's, you know, we're really trying to create with this wellness time with the G.R.O.W family, like Rosy said earlier, this place where they do belong. Our students, by the time they've already gotten to our ED programs, feel like school is not for me, right? This is not their gig. They are not good at doing schoolwork. They're not good at getting along with their peers or with the adults. And so they're wrapped up in that identity. And so we really we have to work hard to counter that, right? To counter their own narratives about themselves, that they don't belong, that they're not a learner. And we do that first and foremost by helping them feel that they belong, that their whole person belongs, right? Even with the behaviors that are so gnarly and difficult and challenging, that they belong. And I know that I have been totally guilty of this too. Rosy and I both, like, in having discussions in previous years about like, oh gosh, if that one kid wasn't in this program, it would run swimmingly, right? We've all said that about different kids over time in our programs. And sure, but I think that's really the narrative that we want to change, is that every kid belongs. Like Dr. Becky Bailey says, there are no weeds, and we need to embody that and help the other students to embody that too. So when they see behaviors in the other students, we're all a family. You know, we all have our different issues, and we're all going to be there to support each other, and everyone belongs. And the more that the students start to feel like that's actually true, the more willing they're going to be to accept coaching from us, to accept that support, to help their peers, right? They're not going to be judging their peers and their behavior either. They're going to be more willing to step in a coaching role as well. So that's the intent behind building the wellness time and the G.R.O.W family. Just looking at some of the comments. Shalani's saying, this is why I feel it's so important to honor their requests when they can express themselves in socially acceptable ways. I want to teach them they are heard so they don't have to go to the next level with behavior. Absolutely. Yes. And they're going to be able to access that part of their brain and engage in those socially acceptable ways when they're more connected, right? When they feel that sense of safety and connection with you. looks like Isabel, is that you saying, I've been teaching preschool for 35 years and I strongly believe the GROW program should be implemented. I think that's what it says. Thank you, Isabel. Okay, does anybody have anything else to contribute? Feel free to unmute your mic. Again, this is open. You know, this is a great time to kind of share your thoughts. And we are definitely open too if there's something that you're like, I am just not swallowing this pill. This is not resonating with me at all. We're happy to hear that feedback too. And sometimes we're going to need to agree to disagree, and that is okay, but we really want to just open this up to have a conversation and learn from each other. So anybody else want to jump in, ask a question?
I have a question.
Yeah.
You talked about classes offered from Dr. Green.
Uh-huh.
I was wondering when they would be posted on the SELPA calendar, and do we just pay online or?
So I think that might have been a little bit of a misunderstanding. So Dr. Ross Green, he is the one who created the Collaborative and Proactive Solutions Model, CPS. He himself is doing a 2-day training on Thursday and Friday, and I'll give you the dates right now. Next Thursday and Friday, the 4th and 5th of June. And you register through his website. Lives in the Balance. So we as a SELPA will not be putting on that training. We are going to attend it as participants, Rosy and I, and other SELPA staff. But anybody is welcome to sign up. It's $175 a person, and it's a full 2-day training on the CPS model done remotely by Dr. Green himself.
Okay. And what's the name of his website?
Lives in the Balance.
I have it in my notes.
Yeah, I think
I just registered last week. I highly recommend if you guys have any monies for like professional development, or you're just going to talk to your director about it, like, you know, we can't encourage people enough to sign up for it. He's going to be teaching it directly.
Yeah.
So,
here's his website. It's livesinthebalance.org. Putting the link in the chat too for you.
And it's online?
Yes, it is online. So I believe if you go to CPS resources, why is it doing that? Let's see, workshops and trainings. I believe it's here. So yeah, they just did a full day introductory training on May 22nd. And then the 2-day advanced training is next Thursday and Friday, the 4th and the 5th.
Okay, and you can go if you have not attended the introduction?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
you can. And then it sounds like they're going to be available through pay-per-view afterwards. So if you're not able to attend the 2-day training, then you can access it another way later and just watch it.
Okay, thank you. And there was another one you ladies mentioned.
Wasn't Conscious Discipline, was it?
No.
No, I think it was the one last Friday, his first one.
Oh, okay. Maybe that was it.
He had a 1-day and then this one.
Yeah. And then if you go to the educators/schools tab, what we talked about during our last training, we watched a lot of these videos. We did the walking tour here on his website. So if you do that walking tour again, he has tons of free videos about him training on CPS. And then he also has really 45 to 50 minute sessions where he's had a couple videos posted where he does CPS with a student and where he does it with a family. So so feel free to navigate this website too and check out
Thank you.
They have.
Thanks.
Sure. All right. Anybody else have any questions?
Can you flash back to that slide that has those components?
Which one? Am I on it right now? Which one?
No.
Yes, I can.
The one of the GR.O.W.
This one?
We put together, yeah.
Yeah.
There we go.
Just
Yeah,
jog
it helps
memory.
jog our memory. Absolutely.
So we're fine with doing kind of the way we've been doing, like having them work and then take a nice chunky break.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We find that a lot of programs like doing that. So again, that's like a tier 1 strategy that you would use. Again, we're not saying that behavioral strategies are like out the door. We just
Right.
have to be very conscious about just having a one size standard fit all approach.
Right.
B, it's funny because we didn't like tell anyone what to present, and Ryan Kirkendall's like putting the I back in the IEP presentation. We were like, shit, we should have thought of that being the title of this entire series, because that's so perfect. It is about individualizing. And so when we see our students struggle with really anything, we're going to use the CPS strategies with them. And in the fall, we're going to go into a lot of concrete detail about how to do that with you guys.
Okay.
But a lot of programs like doing and we're doing this already, the last like 4 or 5 years, where, in a lesson, let's say a lesson was like 30 to 40 minutes, each student would work on whatever they needed to work on. And once they were done with that, they would have this like natural kind of free time anyway. Right. And so you could totally continue to use that. That works really well for students, and those structures and that predictable routine works really well. So we're not saying get rid of those things. Keep doing those, and actually having it be intermittent. And for like elementary school, they really need it every 30 to 40 minutes. They can't really go 45 minutes of working and being able to then like decompress. If that were the case, they wouldn't be in our programs. So I think on average, what Alison and I have found the last 2 years is our elementary school kids really can sustain at max 20 minutes. That's with a lot of hard work on your guys' part on having them engage in sustained academics, right? Whatever that looks for that individual student. And then they are done, they put that away, and they get like a 10 to 12-minute chunk of time, right? Because then you want about 3 or 4 minutes to transition them to clean up and where they get ready again. So think about what that cycle is going to look like for your kids. Your lessons should not be 30 minutes of lecturing and then 30 minutes of work production. You're shooting yourself on the foot, right? So you really should probably, doesn't mean that you can't stick to one topic for a full hour. You sure can. You would need to do it in like these 20-minute kind of chunks of time where in between. And again, a 2-minute break is not sufficient for most kids. And it's definitely not sufficient for elementary school kids. So one of the recommendations that I have historically given to teams is I walk in and it looks very clearly like the student is using their replacement behaviors. And again, this is not ABA bashing. This is not bashing, our wonderful FBAs or BIPs, but our student is literally saying, I need 5 more minutes. I need 5 more minutes. They're literally saying they're using the replacement behavior. And we're like, nope, the timer's off. You had your 2-minute break. It's time to get back on task, right? We get into that power struggle of I'm the adult, you're going to obey. That's why you're here, because you can't obey, and now the buck stops with me. And then there's a whole blowout that leads to physical intervention. And I'm like, well, guys, they're actually using the replacement behavior. We need to honor it. And this is where the CPS would come into play. We would proactively brainstorm with the student what's going on. More than likely, they're going to be able to tell us what's going on. And so if the kid is actively avoiding for multiple days, that's why we collect our data. And then we have a team meeting and discuss like, hey, they're actively struggling. But better yet, what we're trying to retrain our teams to do is you're not waiting for a team meeting. You see your kid struggle, you automatically go into the CPS mode. So I know it sounds like, oh my gosh, this is going to take all forever. It's going to become old hat. It's going to become old hat, just like giving feedback is, just like all the growth mindset stuff. Last year, like, we can't do this. And now you all are very comfortable with it. It'll become old hat. Thank you for bringing that up, Shalani.
Anybody else want to jump in with a question, comment? Just need to mull something over.
So I'm thinking I'm just brainstorming because
Mhm.
nobody else is talking. No, so we have, I don't know if everybody else has the extra room. I'm sure they mostly do.
Most elementary programs do.
Yeah, I'm just gonna change our honors room into basically a classroom
Mhm.
so that we can just use that.
Yeah.
And I feel like it'll be more effective when we have to vacate our classroom. Because they'll still be in learning mode, because otherwise it's kind of a thing that takes their attention because they know they're in the honors room.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, just make both of them learning environments.
yeah,
Yeah.
Because wellness really isn't about the room, right?
right.
It's
It's not.
a state of mind. It's existing, right?
Mhm. So we'll have some fun things in both classrooms. So to do wellness in either room, wherever we are. But I'd like to keep as much of the wellness time in our regular class, our first classroom, to show them you can enjoy this room. And they're doing that already. They're already doing it. We've just about phased honors out.
Yeah. You guys naturally were doing that because it was so hard for like 2 of your students in particular, and
Yeah.
it overall impact the entire class.
Right.
So I really think that sometimes like we never advise people to give up their real estate. You never give up room. Once you have that real estate, you hold on to it like nonstop. So you can use it for instruction, which is actually really good because some of our kids, I can think of 2 of your kids that the idea of walking out of your room to another room for instruction would already be heightening, right? So that's a great way to like rotate and practice and build on those skills. And for some of the kids, it wasn't an issue. So they would do really well with that. And then, like you said, when there is a time where it's more challenging, it's just a given that in both settings we're learning. And again, for our kids, it should be no matter where you are, you're always learning versus like, this is where I earn my freedom from learning.
I have just I was hoping to actually get like an example, like how would you guys go about a repairing in like a certain situation to where someone was being harmful, or I'm not sure, someone got hit or something, of something that escalated.
Mm-hmm. So I think that we would still use the same. I think the biggest piece of advice is it doesn't have to happen that day. In fact, I think it's always usually like better if we wait for a little bit and revisit it unless the kids are really ready to like move on. But then what that turns into is more of that collaborative problem solving, right? So just like we saw with Dr. Bailey, we attend to the student who got hurt. We help them be assertive, right? So it's none of this is new. It's in all of our SELs, whether you're doing Second Step or School Connect. And then we help the student who was the kid who hurt the other kid be able to walk through whatever repair needs to be done, right? And sometimes that means I'm not ready to solve this, and that's completely okay, because the last thing we want to do is insist on it, because that's going to escalate, right? And so you can come back, and in fact, if you do come back, then what we want folks to get into the habit of it is doing that collaborative and proactive solutions. Like, hey, I noticed that this and this happened. What's up? Help me understand. And then you go through the rubric that Dr. Green has laid out of identifying, because there's always a function, right? It's not just because like they wanted to like give someone a bloody nose. Allison, what would you say?
The only thing I would add to that is that repair too can be done from the adult's perspective. Like if Rosy's term, if we screwed the pooch, like as the adult, right? Then we need to model that repair too. We need to model coming to the student and owning, our piece in it. And maybe we pushed too hard when they were using a replacement skill and strategy, and we pushed too hard, and that was our own stuff, right? And so acknowledging that and just saying, like, I'm really sorry, you were trying to communicate with me and I wasn't able to hear it, in the moment. And we model that. We model owning and taking responsibility for our behavior. So that's part of repair too, right? And then moving on. It's not something we need to belabor. Will, does that answer your question?
Yeah, but I had a following question.
Yeah.
So, because yes, I get it. Don't try to force a repair process out of a student ever, because it can escalate. Like, how would you guys approach it if just every time, like, the student was just, I don't know, if a student just doesn't want to repair or
Yeah, that's going to happen.
or talk about it, or so you
Mm-hmm.
I guess what I'm saying is, like, how long would you wait before even, or would you just not even mention it?
So it could take months. So this is where, again, like, we have to make that clinical decision. Like, okay, is this something that we want to stick to? Is this something so big that we got to make sure that there's a bigger lesson and we have to get to whatever is underneath this? Or is this like a kid thing where they hit somebody or they took something and it's like one of those things where we don't have to like make a mountain out of a molehill? So like talk to your teacher, talk to your team. And if you're really questioning it, get advice from your BCBA, your mental health therapist. But for example, one that is serious. So I think most of you have heard about my 7th grader who almost ripped open my earlobe, right? I just happened to be delivering the bad news that he wasn't making it to honors, and he almost ripped my earring out. And so it took us nearly 4.5 months for that repair. Now I wouldn't bring it up every day and be like, oh, hello, sir. Are we going to repair today? Like, totally, that would not work. So I would try to, like, once a week, bring up and say, hey, are you thinking that you want to talk about like the repair process? And he knew exactly what he was. And he would actually be like, you're still on this? And I said, it's not that I'm mad. I just think it's really important that you and I are able to talk about it so that we learn not to just sweep things under the rug, and eventually it took over 4 months. He was in a place where we had all built relationship with him. He'd gotten into routines. He was being successful academically and behaviorally. And without knowing it, and in reflection and talking to that team, we were doing a lot of pieces of that CPS. It's just it wasn't packaged. And I think that's why we struggled so much, because we didn't have the knowledge and insight that I think we are beginning to get now, just for the beginning stages. He was really able to explain why he got so upset. I was able to explain that I had never stopped caring about him, but the reason that I had wanted us to go through this is that if we don't learn to come back to someone that we have hurt, either intentionally or unintentionally, we like build up really bad patterns in our brain, right? And so he heard it. And by the end of 8th grade, like, there was one time, this was like April of 8th grade, I went in to check on him in his gen ed class, and I gave him some feedback. And from everything I saw outwardly, he was like on it. He was doing great. He was smiling and laughing with his group that he was working with. And I simply whispered something to him and he flipped. And he's like, why the fuck are you always doing this to me? And so I just said, okay, I'm going to just go outside. You can find me when you're ready. And I finished chatting with the teacher, helped a couple other kids, left. And like, not even like a minute later, he came out. He goes, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I was up all night gaming and I didn't want to be reminded about my late assignments. I'm like, I get it. We can talk about it when you come back to us 5th grade. 5th period. We'll figure out a way to solve this. And then when he came back 5th period, he's like, so aren't you proud that I repair so fast? like, yes, I am really proud that you can repair this fast. And if anything, if my only role in that human's life is to teach him that repairing, because a lot of times the reason that we all as human beings avoid repairing is that it means you have to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
When we repair, when we've screwed the pooch with something, whether you're a small human or a big human, you have to be brave enough and vulnerable enough to say, I'm sorry. I did something that really hurt you. And that's a skill that we're never taught. We're taught the opposite. And in fact, we all build these narratives and these self-defense narratives because it's about our own survival. So it could take Will a long time, but like something like that is very serious. But him, like this student would drop F-bombs periodically. Like I was not going to insist on and follow up on a repair process because he's falling asleep in class in our G.R.O.W classroom, and I go prompt him. He's like, what the fuck? I was not going to like follow up and do the repair process for an F-bomb. Right. But for something like almost hurting someone's body, that's something that's worth. So my answer to you is it can take a long time. But then that's why you have a team. And then if you're unsure about like, is this one that we work on longer? I would take it to the team.
And like Rosy said too, Will, I think that's where you would look at CPS. If it was one of those things that's predictable, if it's a behavior that's occurring on a semi-regular basis under certain circumstances, then we would want to look at that through the CPS model. And that would be one of our unsolved problems, you know, under what circumstances is that behavior occurring? And then we would work through the CPS strategies with that student so that we help him or her to solve that problem. So that hopefully down the road, we're no longer needing you're not having to do the repair over and over again because we've taught the student the skill they were lacking.
Yeah, no, that actually really helped a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I actually had a question too that's like relating to that. Like, is it ever like too late to repair? Because I know like when we're in that setting and like when it happens that day, of course, we're going to follow up with the repair. And sometimes we even don't just because of how crazy it gets.
Yeah.
And it's like, and sometimes it's like we just have one of those weeks or few weeks where it's constantly like that, where something's constantly happening. And right when we think about it, like we're like, oh, we need to do that, but it's not the right time right now. And then we forget about it because something else happens. So it's like I constantly find myself like, oh my gosh, I forgot to like mention to like try and repair and, you know, all of that. And especially like with a couple students, you know, in our class, it's constantly like, I guess it would be, we'd have to look at the CPS model because it's constantly recurring just because of their dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
But like we got to the point where we didn't do any verbal repairing. We had them write letters to each other.
Yeah.
Just because if they tried to verbally repair, it would have turned into a bigger fight because they wouldn't have liked what the other person said and the other person wouldn't like what they said and they would have got their feelings hurt. And
right. Again, you really just don't want to force it. Right.
Yeah.
We're not forcing the repair process, but if you're saying like, is it ever too late? I mean, no, I don't think it's ever too late. I mean, if my husband and I get in an argument, you know, and we don't repair it and then we kind of move on. And then a week later, he's like, I was thinking about that. And I really, you know, messed up, you know, and he owns his piece of it. Like that would mean a lot, right? To me, to think like, gosh, he's still been thinking about this and how it affected me and how he wants to do things differently moving forward, right? That would impact me a lot. So I think that it's never too late to attempt a repair.
Yeah.
And Shalani's saying that they always remember and they do.
Yes.
So it's not always repairing like when we mess up.
Right.
So I have done that repeatedly, especially like I think in my position because I'm like a jackrabbit. I jump all over the place, literally. And so there's times where I have had to cancel something that I was going to do with a student, or I gave a student feedback in not the most loving manner. And so I've gone back 3 weeks later to this student, and it's always funny when it's the older kids because they look at you, which is heartbreaking because no one's ever modeled this to them. But there's a student, those of you who are at GV know who I'm talking about, a really big guy who's suffered a lot in his life and kind of just has a hard shell. And I just was not, I wasn't on my best game. And I kind of redirected him in not the most compassionate way. And then I wasn't there for like almost 3 weeks because there were other things going on. And when I came back, I said, hey, remember last time I was here, I was kind of snotty and I really did not mean to like give you that feedback that way. He goes, I have no idea what you're talking about. I go, I know you don't. But, you know, it was the morning check-in and you were pretty like active and I tried to redirect you a couple times and you kind of ignored me. He's like, well, that's what I do all the time. I go, I know, but I didn't, when I followed up, I wasn't like the kindest. He goes, you don't even have to say anything. I'm like, no, I do. Like I do. And he just kind of looked at me. He was wondering, he felt like there was a catch. And that like broke my heart when I left there because I'm thinking he probably does not had many people do that with him. But they also remember when it's themselves. So let's say in elementary school, 2 kids have some little friction, and you're right. Sometimes we go weeks where we're just like, we are just getting through the day because that's all you can do, right? And then we're like, oh, we're breathing. And we're like, oh, there's that one time. So then what we do is you can get together again through like a CPS thing and say, hey, remember 3 weeks ago when Billy and Jenny were playing dinosaurs during like, our wellness time and you tried to join in, but they like told you that you smelled bad and that you weren't allowed. Do you remember what happened? And hey, I would like us to have some time to go back and repair that. What do you think? Right? And then you walk them through why you even need to go back. Because they're like, they do remember, but they're probably not going to want to work on it. So then you go back and you explain, what, stuff always stays with us. It's important to talk about them together and problem solve together. So again, I'm so glad, Michaela, that you're bringing this up because in the moment, we're not going to be able to address every single thing, right? Because if it's going to be, oh, he's ready to go back and learn academically, or I need to do the CPS thing with him right now, you're going to have him go back and learn academically. And then when you come back and you do the collaborative problem solving.
Well, and just to add to that too, Rosy, with CPS, there's plans A, plan B, and plan C. And plan A is the imposing your will on the student. And we know that's not the way we want to go. Plan B is this collaborative problem solving, like the conversation that you have with the student where you're talking about whatever that unsolved problem is, you're talking, you're getting the student's perspective on it, you're sharing your adult perspective on it and why it's an issue for you, and then you're brainstorming a solution together. And then plan C is prioritizing, right? So you're not going to solve every single problem. And I think that that's also the same with repair, right? We're not always going to be able to repair every single situation. So that's really where we're collaborating with our team to see, hey, do we all think we need to circle back with this one? Right? If we didn't repair it that day, do we all think we need to circle back with this one? Or these ones that we're tackling through CPS? So can we just let that one go? Right? So that's really where this team discussions and you guys being able to have time to debrief is so important so that you can be talking through that, because you're not going to be able to solve every problem and you're not going to be able to repair every issue that happens throughout the day. It's impossible. And you don't want that occupying your brain space either all the time of like, I have all this list of things that we need to repair. That's not helpful for you, and that's not going to be helpful for the students either.
Yeah, like, because there's also like what if like, let's say they already repaired and like the student that did like said something that was really hurtful to the other person, like they genuinely meant like they were sorry because they realized that this was an issue and they shouldn't have done it. But the other person, like, even though they repaired and she kind of like, forgave him, but like 2 weeks later, it's same thing. Like it comes up, they keep bringing it up. Like, they think this, they think that, they hate me. It's like in that situation, like, what would be like the best route to go? Like, do we revisit the repairing of that just because it's so like traumatic for that other person?
What you do is you go back to the CPS. So if something like that comes up, then that's exactly the whole spiel of there's an underlying need that's not being met, right? If at the surface, everybody like moved on and repaired, there's still something that's gnawing away at that student. So that's why you have to do that CPS process, and together in that collaborative state with you and the teacher or whatever, the student, you identify, is this a lagging skill that needs to be addressed with this student? Is there a need in this student? And in that scenario, that's probably a student who's had a lot of like rejection, right? And having to feel like, okay, I'm still okay. They still do care about me, even though they mistreated me. So that's why that CPS process is so important to go through.
Okay.
Allison, I can see you're thinking.
Oh, I'm just nodding.
Okay.
I'm nodding. Yes. No, I agree. I would use the collaborative problem solving with that type of situation. And in the moment too, with that student, really working on those coaching strategies of coaching that student to be assertive, right? When they don't like something, and
She's very assertive.
Yeah, she is assertive.
She's very vocal of what she does not like.
Right. So may just need to give her more language though with that, and more skill building around that about what she doesn't like. And then, but then having, instead of doing X, if you want my attention, instead of calling me a name, or calling me a bad name, call me by my name, which is Alison,
Yeah.
So giving her that full script that she's going to need, because she may just stop at, I don't like that. Don't talk to me like that.
She's very vocal. Like, she's very expressive of what she does not like, and she will use like certain words, and we're like, oh, like,
yeah,
don't say it like this. Like,
right. So she's gonna need more of that scripting and that coaching.
Yes,
for the adult.
and it's very challenging, especially with that student, just because if we immediately try to like, oh, like, let's try and say it this way instead of using those words, like, she'll immediately like flip her lid, because she'll immediately feel like her feelings aren't being validated.
Right.
And it's very like, it's kind of like walking on eggshells with that type of situation, because it's like, how do I give her the right verbiage for her to understand? And sometimes I can get through to her, but most of the time, like, I just have to let her go through it and feel it, and just like make sure to let her know that I'm there for her, and that like I get how she's feeling. And then once she's calmed down, I'm like, hey, this is what we can do instead. Like, I understand you're upset, but for the other person to realize that this really affects you, you name calling them or you attacking them right back when you don't feel like, when you don't like something, is not the right way to go about it. Let's try.
I think that's where CPS. So like, you're 100% spot on in that first part of like, we're gonna not, escalate the situation. We're gonna give them that space. We're gonna remind them they're safe, that they're being there. We hear them. We notice what they're going through, and then go through the actual plan B of CPS, of proactively problem solving together, because the student that you're describing, I'm super familiar with. The reason that these things she can't let go is she has experienced the most insurmountable amount of loss that a little human can experience. That's why she holds on to these things. And that's why the therapeutic setting is so important for her. But it's going to be less about us giving her two choices or us kind of steering her and moving more into stepping away from that, which is plan A, to more the plan B together, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, she really needs to be heard.
Yeah. And that's really what that,
Yeah, and towards the end, like, I was figuring that out, and because like we would just be like, oh, calm down, like, like, let's practice our coping skills, like immediately just going into the situation, and it would just make things worse. And like, kind of like, and and we have different other students, but like, it was to the point where I was like, what we're doing isn't working. And it just kind of clicked to me, like, especially, she's a girl, she's like, she's 10, she's about to hit puberty, like, I'm sure, like, she has all these hormones raging. And like, for me personally, I need my girls to back me up. Even if I'm in the wrong at the time, I need to feel some sort of validation, like, that this is what I'm feeling. And then when I've come down from it, then I can, hear criticism. But like, in the moment, like, I don't want to hear criticism. I just want to hear that you understand how I'm feeling and that you have my back. And that's what I was doing with her. I was like, and it seemed to like her escalations got like to where they were turned around really fast, more than.
And that's because that's consistent with all the training that we've had done with CPI and conscious discipline and CPS, which is in those moments of even subtle escalation, all we need to do is have a way to safely maintain ourselves and be heard. And then when we're back in we're not in the emotional state, we're not in our survival state, we're in our actual thinking state, then we can do the other stuff. So I think as grown-ups, we've all been trained for thousands of years that we should command small humans to snap out of it, and they should snap out of it. When we, as large humans, don't snap out of it, right? If someone's telling me, I just need you to pull it together, you need to stop crying, you need to stop, giving me dirty looks, I'm going to further escalate because that's just physiology. Mm-hmm. That's not choice. And so I think that's why you're like, oh, it's not working. It's because it's not working. And we really, I don't think for at least I can speak for myself, and then Alison, until this year when we were doing the conscious discipline and CPS learning, it didn't really all come together for me in that how much we all operate in our default settings as grown-ups. And you and I already, in all the literature we've been reading for the last 3 years, knew that the narratives, our defaults, that was where most of this work needs to be done. But it wasn't until the CPS and conscious discipline, the way that they organized it, that I'm like, oh, we inadvertently keep making things worse. We aren't really doing the CPI strategies. We really aren't de-escalating because we're still trying to impose our will on them. And that's because that's what we've done for generations. So what do you think?
And I've even I've been noticing that too. And even just studying the developmental of their brain at certain ages, because it's I have twin nephews and they come quite often, and my brother looks at me sideways when I'm because when they're impatiently waiting, they're like, I want it now, and I'm like, oh, I'm like, oh, Cash and Carter, oh, I know you guys don't understand how to wait in time right now, and I sympathize, and I give them that love, and I'm and I am trying to understand, I'm I understand that you guys have no concept of time right now.
And I want to add.
Sorry, I have a toddler intrusion.
Oh, that's okay.
So no, I did not. I was just trying to get him to go outside, so I did not catch the end of that.
No, I think that the conclusion of that is we've all gone to trainings, but I don't think we quite really got the piece of imposing our will and how our default settings apply right away really has been our worst enemy. So I'm seeing some comments. How are people feeling? The student store is something that really is going to be an individualized thing for each program. Some programs across the county have very robust student stores that work really well for their kids. I'm assuming you're going to keep using those. And others have much more restrictions on how they can use their student store. They can't be buying the junk stuff. Overall, I'm sure it's not news to you. Directors and school districts would love to see us fade from using primary reinforcers, right? And from having a lot of junk food stuff. So, but how are some of you guys thinking you're going to either maintain the way that you've done your student store, change it? What are you guys thinking?
And I don't mean to call you out, but Daniel, I see that you're here. I would love to hear your thoughts on this, because I know that in your classroom, this was something that there were a lot of, behaviors around with the students not having enough money to buy something, or just kind of what that cash out looked like. But then you guys also really effectively used it to use the bucks to praise students, so what are you thinking? How are you looking at adapting that?
I keep thinking about that because I know for a handful of our students, it was very motivating. But at the same time, we would have students for periods of time, sometimes like weeks or months, who just didn't care about the student store, didn't care about honors, and it seemed like there was nothing to motivate them. But at the same time, I would like to scale back the student store because it almost turned into an expectation that even if they lost access to the student store that day, it did cause a lot of issues. But I think a big part of it too is the fact that I had second grade up to sixth grade. The little kids, it worked really well, but the older students, I don't know what it was. They kind of got over it or had higher expectations. And I think some of the items that they wanted, they got larger and larger. And then they also kind of figured out that they could have a really rough few weeks, and then they could save up their money and they would have one good day just so they can make that purchase. So it didn't always seem to be effective
right,
for a long time.
Right. So Daniel, have you watched the Conscious Discipline series?
I saw half of them. I was waitlisted for, I think, the first few of them, and so once those videos come out,
I'll give you access so that you can watch all of them, because I think that watching it will help you wrap your head around this a little bit too. Because I've been thinking about you and your class and what that does look like for you guys, and a couple of things just to respond to a lot of the things that you shared. Is that one is that, having those external reinforcers, it doesn't mean that we're just saying don't use external reinforcers at all, right? We're saying that through collaborative problem solving with that particular, if for that student identifies that that's a motivator for them and they want to work towards something, and that's going to help them practice a skill that's difficult for them, but they identify that, then great, let's do that, right? The second thing is that what Dr. Becky Bailey talks about this during the Conscious Discipline series is that we kind of train it into kids too, to really expect that external validation or that carrot being dangled in front of them. And so the students at a younger age may be holding some power for them, but then, like you're saying, the older ones, it starts to lose that power because they're thinking like, is this really worth it for me? Right? And they kind of figure out the game. So I think that that's really another reason why this is a strategy or a tool that we just don't feel is going to be really beneficial with our students in the long run in terms of skill building and the delivery of the bonus bucks, how that gets to be and can be shaming for other students, even though the intent is positive, right? For the ones who are earning the bucks. So, but for you, it's kind of figuring out, how am I going to individualize this? And how are we going to make this something that's do you want to keep some element of the student store going, do you think, or are you thinking not having it at all?
I think I'm going to keep some elements, but I think the larger items that the students chose, I want to get rid of. I like the small items. And again, for the little kids, and we had a lot of snacks. I think a lot of our budget went to snacks that they could buy, as well as the ones that were just kind of handed out just because.
Right.
So I'd like to do more like that. And like, we also did a lot of like the cooking on Friday. So I spent a lot of our budget on stuff like that, which was more, I think that was what they looked forward to more than anything.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and they talk about that too during the Conscious Discipline. There's one classroom that she interviews, and they talk about doing activities that gave them the fuzzy feeling, as opposed to that program had like a treasure box. And I think you were in that one, Daniel, because I remember you asking, like, is this an ED program that they're doing this in? Because that particular one made me think of you, because it's, I don't think it was just a gen ed class, but those kids said that they didn't want the treasure box. They actually didn't want to work towards those external reinforcers. They wanted more of that wellness time. Right? Just that time to connect. And like your class really enjoying the cooking. And it's not about the food necessarily. It's about that time together, right? That you're spending with them, and you're asking them about their preferences and teaching them, like Stuckey talked about in her training where she does, like, they were making different salsas, and the students are learning what they like, what they don't like, but they're interacting with you in a way that's not placing academic demands on them, and it isn't a highly stressful situation, right? So a lot of connection happens during that time, which is probably why they gravitate towards those kind of activities.
Yeah, and it's also going to be interesting for next year because I think some of the older students are going into junior high. So I think I might finally have a classroom that's maybe just 2 grades instead of 4 or 5. So I think that's going to be a big help, just similar age, because a lot of the older students, when they kind of got burned out, the younger students idolized them and would kind of just follow suit and kind of follow their lead. So we had a few instances where that kept happening.
Right. Yeah.
And that's super hard because developmentally, like a 2nd grader and a 6th grader are like 2 different species. It's just so challenging to meet those needs, you know, across such a wide range. And I so appreciate, Daniel, how like authentic you are in sharing like these struggles, because they are completely common across the state. This is not a Santa Barbara County thing, right? And the interesting thing is when you look at like non-public schools where we're thinking, oh, those people really have their act together. Hell no. Like they have just as many challenges, if not more, because there's like hundreds of kids, right? So I really want to encourage our teams to really be thinking about what class-wide strategies are you going to want your team to be using? Like, you know, the way that we give kids positive feedback, the noticing language versus judging, right? How we're going to be connecting. Like, think about those class-wide strategies. It's not a problem to have like a group contingency where like you guys are working towards a pizza party where like you guys do a certain activity, and if they can like practice being patient and taking their turns, like it's no loss if they don't earn it that day. It's just something you can do class-wide. And then how you're going to do, like, if you are going to have elements of your student store, really think about that and seek out the feedback from your paras, because a lot of times they're the ones that are like, while you're trying to teach, or they're ones trying to like coach behavior. So get their feedback. And I know sometimes it's a little tricky when paras are not actually district employees. They're like subcontracted through Maxim or some other agency. But try to find a way to get their feedback, and then get the feedback from like your specialists, like your mental health specialist and your BCBA, as to how we can support you in doing that. And then think about, like, you know, in general, what are those areas that are the most challenging? Like, typically they're transitions, and they're typically when things don't go students' ways and they lose access to something, right? So how are we going to handle that now as we're pushing CPS? How is that going to look? And hopefully by having just wellness be something that everybody's participating in, we're going to have fewer power struggles with the older kids. It's really the 5th through 8th grade kids who are having like the biggest melts about student store and access to honors. We have some outliers here and there of, like, you know, younger kids that's a big factor for them. But I encourage you guys to like draft some stuff up. And then if you want guidance and support, or just, hey, this is how I'm thinking, email it to this group or email it to just Alison and I. But I think that for next year, we're wanting to have this be a grow learning community where we come back with each other and say what worked and what didn't work.
I'd heard somebody else that was going to jump in earlier. Thought I'd heard somebody, if anybody wanted to comment on that as well. Nope. I was just thinking to myself while you were talking about that, Rosy, because I know it's really hard, you know, we have a student store, and if there's some elements that are working and some that aren't. I mean, in what we're reading and with conscious discipline and with CPS, the earning part, right, is, I just wonder if it's something that you have those snacks available, and it's something, and Rosy, I'm just talking off the top of my head, but I wonder if it's something that just if a student does engage in a, uses a strategy or does something that you want to point out and highlight, then you get to say, oh, hey, you get to go pick from the, whatever it is, the student store, whatever you want to call it. You get to go pick a snack. I really liked how you did X, Y, or Z. Right. And it's not that they're cashing in bonus bucks for that. It's just something that you are granting them access to in the moment.
And so you're delivering contingent reinforcement and they are earning it, but it's not with the pressure of cashing out or waiting until a student store is open. But I also do think that non-contingent reinforcement is underutilized. I think that when I first started working in ED programs, I was so used to the world of mod to severe programs in the world of autism with contingent reinforcement that it took me a while to be like, wait, I really need to be using non-contingent reinforcement here more often. So I think, Alison, one of the things that, just not to overwhelm people, right? There's so much. If I had my wish, our focus for next year as grown-ups would be two things: the breathing and wishing well. And again, it's not because we're crunchy granola hippies. The breathing is literally a coping skill, the number one coping skill for reducing our physiology. The only other thing we could add to that would be drinking, but I don't really know that we're all going to be carrying our water bottles with us. But breathing, we all need to be that. We all of us, no matter what program we're in, what ages we're serving, we need to be breathing, and we need to be doing it now. Go home and start putting your timers. It is really hard. I have my timer set for every 47 minutes. I don't know why 47. I think it's just where it fell. And I will forget to be doing it. It's not automatic. But I can tell you this much: after doing it now for almost a month, there have been a couple of times where I have wanted to scream at my husband or my said children, and I actually remember, oh, I'm not supposed to do that. I need to breathe. And I take a deep breath and I breathe in and I breathe out. So, and then the wishing well is not crunchy granola stuff. It's literally going back to CBT strategies, cognitive behavioral strategies of reframing and anchoring ourselves in a positive thought, right? Because if we start thinking, here he goes, he's going to escalate, it starts increasing our own physiology and we're not able to stay calm and coach, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not like you're just being a yoga instructor and having a positive intent. There's solid science behind this. So that'd be one, the breathing and wishing well. And then if you don't like the wishing well, just call it positive reframes. And then the second piece would be the collaborative proactive solutions steps. The rest of this stuff is cake. Start off with a general agenda of what you think you're going to do for your student store and outings, and then it's going to be individualized, as time goes by. But I really think that as a community, we all need to make that pledge of doing the breathing and wishing well and learning how to do the CPS, because all of those are about us staying calm so that we can coach our kids and then help them skill build.
And just so you know, Rosy and I are planning, we'll talk about this next week too, but about PDs for the fall. So that prior to school starting, we're going to touch base with all of your teams too about the different components and kind of trying to solidify and put more of these plans into place and fill in gaps in whatever different components we may need more training or education on.
I just wanted to add, thank you guys. And I was nodding my head in agreement the whole time. But I wanted to say, since watching the Conscious Discipline, I haven't put a timer on my phone yet to go off every, I would probably need it 15 minutes or so. But I've noticed because something that stuck with me from those, from the videos was how as adults, we tend to live in a stressed state. Mm-hmm. So every time I catch myself clenching my jaw or breathing lightly, I remind myself, I take those 4 seconds in and then 4 seconds out, those long breaths. And just doing that, I feel more calm throughout the day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great.
It really does help.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Will. Anybody else have any parting thoughts? I know we're getting close to 3. No.
I do.
Kathleen.
I just want to thank you ladies for all of this. I don't even know where to begin to thank you. Most of it applies to my own personal self,
Yeah.
you know, and it's just been amazing. Everything.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're
Thank you.
very
Thank you.
welcome.
Thank you.
You're so welcome. Thank you, Kathleen. Lorice, do you want to share about that?
Sure. So over the last year or so, I found myself at a talk at Cal-ABA, I think, about acceptance and commitment therapy and how it actually has a place in ABA because it came from ABA. And so over the last few years, I've really been drawn to ACT, and so I don't know about anybody else with an ABA background, but that wishing well piece was kind of foreign to me and felt like, what are we really doing in that piece, right? And so in ACT, there's, I think, 6 different skills that you work through. And one of them is diffusion and another one is present moment. And so I think the wishing well, I think Rosy kind of alluded to this, is like a reframing your mind or changing the problem in your brain to something else. And so, as opposed to being like, oh my gosh, this kid's going to blow up again. Instead, you're like, I'm going to wish him well because he's struggling, really diffusing from that anxiety. And then the present moment awareness, piece, you're really contacting your environment that you're in and the things in your environment that are positive. I don't know. I see a lot of parallels from these discussions to ACT, and it makes me really want to draw those connections because I've been interested in ACT lately.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. I know that I've read about ACT in the past, but I haven't recently, so I'm going to revisit that. But that's great. I mean, I think exactly what you just said, right?
Yeah.
Is reframing it in our head because we're in our emotional state of our brain in that moment too, right? So it's helping us to then reframe it, reframe our narrative too, of oh, this kid's spinning out, this happens every time, and thinking maybe you think I don't know how to handle this. I'm not meant to be here. I've got to shouldn't be in this job. What am I doing? We start spinning out. So it's really helping us to stop that cycle.
And when you're spinning out, that impacts your physiology, and you're then not able to use your executive function, right? And so Michaela shared that when she first heard about this, it made her feel uncomfortable. I think if we were to do a survey, that literally anyone who comes from a background is going to be like, this is literally the first time that Alison brought this to me, I was like, oh my gosh, this is her mental health therapist hat, going way too far. And then I was like, wait, oh, this is very similar to Dr. Wood's work with CBT. And so then I go and it's the same thing. My initial reaction to mindfulness training, 8 years ago, I'm like, oh, this is bogus. This is all crazy, new agey pop psychology, mumbo jumbo people. And then when I'm like, oh, wait, this is coming from Dr. Siegel and UCLA, and wait, the Berkeley, Center for Wellness is looking at this. And then I'd actually go and look at the physiology, all of that mindfulness training. And if we really think about it, cognitive behavioral strategies and pretty much every coping skill under the sun, it's about, it doesn't take away the complexity or the hardship of life. It just allows us to control our physiological responses so that we survive that momentarily. It could be 2 seconds, it could be 3 hours discomfort, so then we can come out and then problem solve or just step away. That's all that this is. Mindfulness training, all this stuff does not fix anything. It just allows us to be able to not lose our cool and to be able to walk through the hardship and adversities of life. Dr. Perry has this quote that I have posted in my car, and I swear somebody's gonna think I'm like Russell Crowe in The Beautiful Mind because I have Post-its all over my car because that's my office. But it says that our objective as adults and teachers and educators and therapists is not to prevent our kids from struggling and experiencing adversity, but to help them learn how to navigate through life's adversities. And I'm like, that's exactly it. Whether that's me as a parent or me as in my professional capacity, I'm just trying to help humans, little humans, learn how to be able to navigate through life's adversities without falling apart. And the falling apart can be a tantrum at 2. It could be cutting at 13. It could be dropping out of school and joining a gang at any point in time. It could be assaulting someone else. And it could be the worst of all, which is like hurting another person where they die or killing yourself, right? So that's why once my own default, and again, it's not just because I'm a behaviorist, it's also my cultural perspective. I come from a very authoritarian Portuguese Catholic culture. And so all my defenses go, and I'm like, oh, no, this is like hippy dippy stuff. My parents warned me about the 60s, so then I like, oh, wait, I do love this.
No, this is, I am a trained therapist, but it's still hard for me. I mean, when I first saw it too with Dr. Becky Bailey, I was questioning it. And then the more that I watched all of her series and really thought about it, I was like, gosh, this is so powerful. And I always like to come back to like the science behind it too, right? It's about, like Rosy said, like managing our physiology. Because once we can manage our physiology, we can access those higher centers of our brains and be more present for them. And like Shalani said, it models to the kids what to do in those adverse times, which is powerful more than words, right? Is us taking that deep breath and slowing down, and how we manage to stay regulated communicates to their little systems, physiology too. And Lauren, thank you, Louise, for sharing that. I'm going to look that up, the Association for Contextual and Behavioral Sciences. That's awesome. I'm going to check that out. And then Lauren said you missed the connection that wishing well is more for our self-control rather than projecting this calmness on children and the Care Bear stare. I still think it's really both, honestly. I think first and foremost, it's to calm ourselves down and get ourselves present in the moment, and in a better frame of mind. And then it's also but that communicates to the kid that like, you're safe.
Yes.
Right. So it's both. It's doing both.
I took notes when Rosy was speaking about like grounding and anchoring and the cognitive behavior aspects, because I feel that if I focus on those words, I'll have this like image in my head very different, because, when Dr. Bailey says, like, I wish you well, and kind of opens her heart, I just imagine like rainbows coming out of our bellies, and like we're aiming these things at the kids to like make them calm, and it just, this is what goes on in my head. And so I think that if I really kind of regurgitate to myself, like, okay, this is more about grounding and anchoring for myself so that I can be in the place where I'm then more available for helping the child, that totally like clicked in my head of wishing well, where I'm like, okay, maybe it's less Care Bearish and more like, okay, this is more about me so I can be available for them, which to me takes it to a whole different meaning in just my interpretations of what I've been following.
Right. And I think it's also, and it's modeling too, like Larissa's saying. I think it's, basically what you just said, Lauren. And it's, I do think the wishing well towards the student, it helps us in our physiology. But like, I think about like with my toddler, I try to do this when I can remember, because I'm practicing and learning too. I don't remember to do it every time. But when he's having a tantrum or behavior, I'm wishing him well, like he can do this. With my help and my coaching and me staying present in the moment, he can do this. He can figure out, like he can get back online. Right. And I'm just reminding myself this, and I'm thinking this to him, like, you can do this, buddy. You can do this. And I've been taking deep breaths with him when he's upset for like a year at least, trying to model that for him. And he all the time goes, stop doing that, mommy, stop breathing like that. And he gets very upset. And it used to be something that really escalates him. And just now, just the other day, literally earlier this week, I forgot to tell you this, Rosy, I think it was like last week actually, I noticed he had his face down in a pillow, and I noticed his little body was taking the deep breaths in the pillow. And I'm like, it's like the first time that's happened. And this has been over a year. of modeling that. So it's helped me to stay more regulated in those moments and be there for him. Do I get it right all the time? No. Right. But it's about us practicing this, and eventually like they're picking up on it. Right. So it's helping us stay grounded, and it's helping them to learn a skill.
Yeah.
Wow.
For me, like, cause like being from that ABA background and like up until like being, like it was kind of like an interesting adjustment for me, cause I'm so, I was drilled fidelity, get everything, follow through, do what you need to do to, it's always A, B, and C, it's already spelled out for you with ABA. And then, with ED, it's not. It's kind of like, I'm going to go to A, and then I'm going to go to C, and then I'm going to go to Z, and then, then it comes all back full circle, because you have to, there's so many different ways to like go about, depending on the student and what they've dealt with. And it made a lot of sense for me personally, because I've also come from a trauma background. So like everything was like clicking to me, and it was like also applying to me, and I was learning a lot about myself too. And it was like really like I was kind of like learning with them, and like able to like push like, like show them like, like we all have struggles and we're all dealing with things differently. Like, like this is how I'm understanding what, like, and being able to heal from it and be able to move on with your life and, go on, through day to day. And like with conscious discipline, it like completely clicked, like with executive emotional survival, because with this pandemic, I found myself like I was lashing out. I was like totally in a survival mode, and I had no idea that I was being this way until, like I finally had someone say like, you need to feel everything. You're not feeling, you're acting out of anger, you're acting out of frustration. And you feel, and because I always used I felt like I was being backed into a corner. I felt like someone was attacking me through this whole ordeal.
And Michaela, like if people were to put electrodes on us, we would see how we are in our survival or emotional brain states, right? And this is why I think a lot of people will just roll their eyes because I keep saying this, but in 15 years when technology is cheap enough, we will actually be able to see that. I don't know if I shared with this team, but if you really want to learn some crazy stuff this summer, go to Northwestern University and Matthew Goodwin. Look up Matthew Goodwin. And the guy's like an evil genius from MIT who's now at Northwestern, and he's working on human mnemonics. And basically, I'm mispronouncing that. They have a study that's coming out where they were able to predict, they were able to take high school and young adult people with autism spectrum disorder who had very severe cases of self-injury and aggression, and who were also either nonverbal or minimally verbal. And they taught them how to tolerate wearing a watch. And with 99% reliability, they were able to predict from a physiological level all of like their increased heart rate and blood pressure. And staff were able to intervene and redirect and introduce coping skills prior to any outward signs of distress. And they almost completely eliminated disruptive behavior. These are people who are biting off chunks of their own skin or putting staff into the hospital, and they were able to do that. And so the technology right now is really expensive. I know we all have like certain watches, but like an Apple Watch is not something that a public school could offer to every single student. But eventually the technology will be inexpensive enough where we're going to be able to do that. And so this is really fascinating stuff that's happening right now in universities across the world. They're figuring this out, that there are physiological responses. And that's what the wishing well does. Mm-hmm. By us doing that, we keep our physiology stable, which then our mirror neurons are connecting with our students, and they're able to not escalate. For me, the whole thing with wishing well that clicked was I watched an old clip of Fringe. If you guys ever want to watch a fun series, watched an old clip of that was on. My son was watching it, and I was watching the character like talk down someone who was going to detonate a bomb. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's what these guys do. They have to train to maintain, and they can't fake it, because if you're faking it, that's why they never put a rookie in the job, because rookies always mess up. Rookies mess up because they actually haven't trained their physiological state to actually stay genuinely calm. So then I went and Googled, how to like FBI SWAT members, and I happen to know a couple people who are FBI SWAT members, and like, oh yeah, we go through very extensive training to figure out how to be able to literally physiologically stay calm during the most troubling of scenarios. And so that's what we need to do. We're basically desensitizing ourselves and habituating our ability to stay calm in stress-inducing states. So that this is all ABA. It's just a very different way of looking at it, because what we do, because we're humans, we say this box is ED and ABA. This is this, this is this. And everything is a giant spectrum, right? And
when they cross paths.
Yes, they
in
do.
many areas. Yeah. All right, guys, I want to be respectful of your time. I know that we've gone over a bit. So thank you all so much for your contributions, for the discussions. And we will see you guys next week. So it'll be next, what day is that? Is our final Grow Summit day, where we're going to kind of just tie it all together.
Tuesday, right?
No, it's next Wednesday. Next Wednesday, the 3rd, June 3rd, is the last day of our Grow Summit. So we will see you all then. Thank you so, so much. We appreciate each and every one of you. And yeah, we'll see you guys next Wednesday. We'll see some of you before then.
Yeah. Bye, guys. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
I wish you guys well.
Wish you well, too.
Wish you well.